So welcome to day one of the Sociology Guys 2022 challenge for AQA A-level sociology students who are doing their A-levels in 2022. So just a quick recap of what the 2022 challenge is. Like the 40-day challenge that I did in 2019, what I do is each morning I will set 20 marks worth of questions for the non-advanced information material. I set those through Twitter and through Instagram feeds, which are at the Sociology Guy and the Sociology Guy. I set those questions through the day. I give a few little hints as to how you might answer those questions, and then of an evening what I do is I do a walkthrough video and I put the written version up on my website, thesociologyguy.com. Today is day one. We're going to look at this over the next 11 weeks. There are 76 days to the first exam, and I'm going to be doing 55 of these. So I'm going to do them every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Each morning I'll set 20 marks of questions, and each evening I will go through them with a short video like this. So let's look at this morning's questions. Now, this morning I focused on education. I'm going to be focusing on education all this week. You can find a full schedule on the website, thesociologyguy.com. This week we're looking at education, and I've picked the spec points that haven't been named in the AI, the advanced information. So first of all, we're going to look at the functions of education, and I've put 20 marks of questions that link into the idea of the functions of education on here. So functions of education is things like the Marxist view of education, functionalist view of education. Some people will put the feminist view in there as well. I've put a question on the feminist view in here. It might not be in some textbooks. Some people may talk about postmodernity and interactionism as well. I think they're a little bit more further along in the spec when we look at the differences in educational achievement, so they're more in there. But the three questions I've asked today are: outline and explain 2 ways that education promotes meritocracy. Okay, so a 4-mark question, which is really 2 sentences for each set of 2 marks. Question 2, outline and explain 3 ways education serves the needs of capitalism. That's a 6-mark question, so it's looking for 3 ways, and it's basically 3 sets of 2 marks. And an item question, which says, item A, in recent years, girls have been outperforming their male peers at all stages of the education system. However, some sociologists suggest that girls are still controlled by a patriarchal education system through their behaviour, their appearance, and the choices they make about their future. And then the question after that is, apply material from item A, analyse 2 ways in which girls are controlled by the education system. So you're looking for 2 kind of developed paragraphs there to explain how this is done. You have to make a link to the item, but we'll go through that a little bit later on in this video. So during the day I also sent out a couple of images with some hints about how you might answer this question. So first of all, we've got the functions of education. So we can say that one way in which education promotes meritocracy is through sifting and sorting individuals based upon their performance in assessments. You know, this idea of role allocation. Another way we could do it is by looking at the idea that qualifications are awarded based upon an individual's performance on an assessment, to compete with one another to see who is the best in subjects and other school activities. 4th way, hierarchies are taught through the hidden curriculum that suggests the higher status you've got, the more ability you have. A 5th way, achievement is seen as a result of hard work rather than any advantages that are gained by your social location, so for example your class, your gender, or your ethnicity. And another way in which it promotes meritocracy is by refusing to acknowledge real barriers to education for disadvantaged groups. Okay, so when we talk about real barriers, things like material deprivation, the cultural differences between different groups, things like institutional racism, lots of different topics that you could throw into that. So I'm going to show you how I've answered this question. I've picked 2 of these to develop, and I've probably done a little bit more than I would normally do because it is the first day of the challenge, so there might be some stuff on here that you might want to cut out a little bit, but I'd rather give you a little bit more at this point than less. So my 2 answers are: one way in which education promotes meritocracy is through awarding grades based upon effort. This promotes the idea to students that their ability is based upon a subjective interpretation of the effort they are able to put into a subject rather than their overall knowledge and understanding, and fails to take into account barriers to education that some students may face. This is probably maybe 1 or 2 reasons actually thrown in here, but I'm getting the way I'm looking at it is that I will get 1 mark for saying through awarding grades based upon effort, and a second mark for explaining how that happens. Section 2, a second way in which education promotes meritocracy is through competition. Students are expected to compete against one another in order to attain the highest grade, and this can be evidenced through university admissions for those with the highest grades, or even algorithms that dictate what percentage of students achieve the highest grades in a subject. Now, algorithms were very controversial in 2020, but algorithms happen in the marking of subjects all the time. What happens is they take the average mark and they have a standard deviation either side of it. So the percentages of students achieving an A, a B, a C, a D, and E are very similar every year, and it's because it's based on a mathematical equation. And the idea would be is that the top 5 or 6% will get an A star, the top 20% will get an A, the next 20% will get a B, the next 20% will get a C, the rest will get a D or an E, and then about 2 or 3% of students will fail. It's always set on this algorithm. So that is another way in which you are competing with one another. Let's look at question 2. Again, I sent out this kind of graphic, and this looks at the way in which education serves capitalism. So first of all, bit of Bowles and Gintis, it prepares students for the long shadow of work. This promotes capitalism. Fragments the curriculum, so pupils don't see the bigger picture, they don't see how they're being exploited. Again, a little bit of Bowles and Gintis. It socialises people into the dominant ideology of society, and that dominant ideology is capitalism and consumption and going out to work in order to earn money. So that's another way it serves capitalism. The teaching a hierarchy, so pupils will then go on to become an obedient and submissive workforce. That's another way it serves capitalism. It legitimises inequality, so working class pupils don't challenge the lower status they have in society because they believe that that's what they deserve. And finally, sorts individuals based upon social class, so that middle class end up in middle class jobs, what we may see as being the reproduction of class inequality. So a number of different functions there. Let's look at how I've written it. So again, I've broken this down into 3 points really, because I'm wanting 3 sets of 2 marks. One way in which the education system serves the needs of capitalism is through the fragmentation of the curriculum. According to Bowles and Gintis, this serves to limit students' understanding of the level of exploitation as they are unaware of the larger picture in society. I could have stopped there, but I've just put an extra line in there. As a result, they fail to challenge the exploitation they face in capitalist society. That last line is really just making sure that I've linked it in to show that I understand how it serves the needs of capitalism. Doing an exam is a little bit like taking your driving test. When you're doing your driving test, you have to make sure that you keep your hands at 10 and 2. You have to make sure that you exaggerate when you're looking in the mirror, and when you're making your signals, and when you're manoeuvring, you have to indicate. You may not do that in real life, but because you're in a test situation, you have to do that in order to pass. And it's the same really when you're doing a written exam. You have to make sure that you are making explicit links to the question. So that last line I've put there, as a result, they fail to challenge the exploitation they face in capitalist society. So this serves the needs of capitalism. Second response, a second way in which education serves capitalism is through introducing students to the long shadow of work. Bowles and Gintis argue that this prepares students for employment by transforming students into passive and obedient workers fit for exploitation by capitalists. Okay, so my 1 mark there is for the long shadow of work, and another mark for explaining how this serves capitalism. And the third one, a final way in which education serves the needs of capitalism, is through promoting the myth of meritocracy. This ensures that students who do not achieve will not challenge the education system, but instead believe it is their own fault they have not achieved, thus forcing them into low-paid employment, serving the needs of capitalism. So you can see there I've identified a way, and I've shown how it fits the needs of capitalism. And that's the type of thing you've got to do on this question. It's a question I've asked a few times. I've asked it as a 10 marker, I believe maybe in about 2019, I think, or maybe 2018. But it's a common one to ask for functions of education. How does education serve the needs of capitalism? How does education promote meritocracy? They are quite common types of questions. The third image I sent out today was looking at how girls are controlled by education. I've put a few ideas up on this sheet. Expectations of girls to be submissive and passive in education. Uniform expectations of girls are higher. Girls are expected not to distract boys with what they wear. Obviously, it's, the emphasis there is placed on girls not to distract rather than boys not to be distracted. And this would be seen as patriarchal control. Subject images will reinforce gendered stereotypes, maybe less so these days, but we can still see that subject images will reinforce gendered stereotypes and maybe counter this point by suggesting that, this has changed a little bit in contemporary society. But we'll look at how I've done that in the next slide, sorry. Girls are expected to conform to particular extracurricular activities, so things like sports and dance. And girls are perceived by teachers the ideal pupil. Now this limits their self-expression, their control. They're expected to be polite, well-mannered, agreeable. And a final one, clash with pupils who develop hyper-heterosexual identities. This comes from the ideas of Archer. Being feminine is a barrier to educational success. So the idea would be is that teachers look at girls who express a hyper-heterosexual personality and see them as being not as intelligent as girls who are a little bit more gender neutral. So with this type of question, what you have to do is you've got the item. You have to explicitly make reference to the item. Now, some people will say you don't. Again, going back to the driving testing, putting it in there and making sure you make an explicit reference to the item is really something that puts the examiner at ease that you have done what the question has asked, that you've drawn material from the item. You may do it implicitly, but you want to make sure that you show the examiner that you have done it. So as a consequence, I would look to quote directly from the item when I would be answering this. Let's look at the first part. So it says apply material from item A, analyse 2 ways in which girls are controlled by the education system. So 2 ways in which girls are controlled by the education system. We've seen 6 ways on the previous slide. What we need to do is we need to pick out some of the hooks in there that we could then potentially develop those 6 reasons into. So if we look at these hooks here, their behaviour, right? Now we can link that into either hyper-heterosexual personalities, we can link it into teacher expectations, we can link it into the development of their identity, their appearance, obviously would link in with things like uniform. We can also maybe talk about, with their behaviour, peer groups and the involvement of peer groups, particularly if girls take on more masculine sports. And I think there was Patcher talked about the idea that girls who did sports in mixed schools were seen as being butch and masculine, as opposed to being feminine. The choices they make about the future, of course, this links in with subject choice and it links in with things like subject images as well. So these are some of the ones we're going to develop. I'm going to pick 2 out and I'm going to show you how I've done it. This type of question, 2-paragraph answer. Start each paragraph one way, in which, and then rephrase the question, and then your second paragraph another way or a second way, and again rephrase the question. So I've done it this way. One way in which girls are controlled by the education system is through the behaviour, and I've put this in quotes and put item A there. I've made an explicit reference to the item that is expected of them. Girls are often seen as being closer to the idea of the ideal pupil, as teachers expect them to be passive and obedient in class. As a result, teachers are more likely to discipline girls for unladylike behaviour whilst allowing boys to act in a similar way. Furthermore, girls are controlled based upon their behaviour towards boys in the classroom. And now I'm going to develop this a little bit more by using a piece of research. Archer, when studying why working class pupils do not see education as fitting in with their identity, found that girls who had developed a hyper-heterosexual identity were perceived to have lower levels of intelligence by teachers and were disciplined for their appearance. Now I've made a link there to another part of the item and behaviour, as it clashed with the expected behaviours of an academically successful pupil. This can be seen to be the school controlling the behaviour of girls if it does not conform to social expectations. So this last line, I've then linked it back to the question. Some people use PEAL format, some people use IDEA, some people use PEEEL. This is the way I like to do it. Make my point at the first part, sort of like, get the hook, link the hook in, then explain how the hook works, use a piece of research in there to kind of back up my findings, and then at the end sort of like link it back and explain how it answers the question. Second paragraph, a second way in which girls are controlled by the education system is through the choices they make about their careers. Item A, again, I've got that explicit link in. This refers to the way in which schools divert girls into subjects and careers that are not in the masculine domain. For example, subject images in subjects such as science are focused on males and the achievements of male scientists. This dissuades girls from choosing a career in the sciences. Now I'm going to bring in a bit of research to back this up. Furthermore, Francis argued that science classes are often dominated by boys, with teachers allowing boys to monopolise equipment, which leaves girls alienated by the subject. However, now there's kind of a school of thought here about whether you evaluate or you analyse. I would suggest sort of like get into that practice of constantly evaluating, because it's really, really useful for the 20 or 30 markers. You're not going to lose marks for putting in evaluation as long as you have analysed. If you put the evaluation in as well, if you get into that good habit of evaluating, particularly for these 10 markers, it will serve you well in the 20 and 30 markers. However, recent changes in subject imagery and initiatives to promote science to girls, such as GIST and WISE, have seen an increase in the number of girls choosing the subject at both advanced level and on undergraduate courses, which counters the feminist argument that girls are controlled in their career choices. Okay, so you can see a second way I've done it there. I've got a bit of research in, I've made an explicit link to the item, and I've explained how it works, which is your key part of your analysis. How are girls controlled by the education system? And you're talking the examiner through this step by step. You're showing you've got a really good knowledge of how it works. So we'll move on to tomorrow's question. Obviously, if you watch the videos, you get the questions a day earlier. Outline and explain 2 ways in which in-school processes impact on social class differences in achievement. Question 2, outline and explain 3 ways social class identity can be shaped by in-school processes in education. And question 3, again, is an item question. Item A, some sociologists claim that a pupil's home background will influence their educational achievement. Parental attitudes, leisure activities, and exposure to cultural knowledge all play a part in pupils' achievement, as does family income. So there's a few little hints that you might want to think about in that question. And then the question is, applying material from item A, analyse 2 ways in which home factors may provide middle class pupils an advantage in educational settings. Now, sometimes the exam boards like to do this. They like to kind of flip the script a little bit. Lots of us learn how working class students are disadvantaged by the education system, but we should also be looking at the way in which the education system puts the middle class at an advantage. So this is kind of flip the script a little bit here. If you've got a question on how working class are disadvantaged, I think it would be quite straightforward. Because they're asking how middle class have got an advantage, then it becomes a little bit more difficult. What you can do is always think of middle class and working class as having almost, when one has an advantage, the other one is disadvantaged. So you can use the similar points, but you then have to explain in your analysis how that puts the middle class an advantage rather than how it disadvantages the working class. So that's something you may want to consider when you're doing that part of the question. So that was day 1 of the 2020 Sociology Challenge that was looking at the functions of education. You've got question 2 you've got the question for day 2, which is going to look at social class and education. Hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow evening. And you'll be able to sort of see my responses there. You can download my written response from my website, thesociologyguide.com. Okay, thank you very much for joining me.